First of all, I'm super excited to be here at the Library of Congress National Book Festival. This has been a dream of mine. I am from Maryland, so this was the festival I went to as a young person, so it's really surreal to be up here moderating and having panels later today. So first, we are at Meet Me in the Winner's Circle with award-winning writers. So these fancy people have won awards, and we're gonna talk about it. We've got The Last Quintista by Dana Barba Higuera. Yes, okay. We can clap, let's give claps. We've got A Snake Falls to Earth by Darcy Little Badger. We've got Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Malinda Lo. And because I forgot to introduce myself, because that's what happens when you get started and do things like this, my name is Danielle Clayton, and I am an author of many things, the Marveler series, The Bells. I'm gonna be on a panel with a bunch of my friends who wrote a book called Blackout later today. And I am the COO of We Need Diverse Books, and very excited to just be here to be able to deep dive books and all things reading and reading culture with these wonderful people. So, I'm very excited to talk in general about award winners, because for so long in children's books, there have been award winners that don't look like anyone on this panel. And so this panel feels revolutionary to me. It feels like a change. It feels like a long time coming and what we need. I also am a former teacher and librarian. So it is very exciting to see people who look like the books, who look like the kids that I used to teach and who used to come into my library. And finally, there are books that reflect their experiences. So I'm excited to deep dive that and learn all about your magic and all the things you put in your work. So first also, I wanna say thank you to all the sponsors who made this festival possible. At the end, about 10 minutes till, we'll have a Q&A, so start thinking about your questions. And always remember that questions have question marks, friends. So when you are invited to ask a question, please do make sure it has a question mark. That's my teacher reminder for you. And then also, all three of these panelists are signing from 1:30 to 2:30. I think my signing's at 6:30. So, are we ready? Yeah? Okay. So the way that I moderate is that I ask a few general questions, and then I put each one of you in the hot seat for you to talk specifically about something in your work that I found really exciting and engaging. So first, we'll warm up with a general question that I would love for each of you to answer. I want you to tell me how you find your stories, especially the story of the book that we're here to talk about. How did it come to you? And what influenced it? And are you writing for your younger self? Are you writing for yourself right now? Tell me your secrets. Melinda, can I pick on you first, because we've known each other for a long time?
Yes, and I'm sitting right next to you. So
and you made eye contact with me, which is the teacher rule breaking number one.
I always make eye contact with teachers.
Yes.
That's right. My novel, Last Night at the Telegraph Club, actually started as a short story that was published in an anthology called All Out, the no longer secret stories of queer teens throughout the ages. So the short story was inspired by two nonfiction books I had been reading at the time. One was called Rise of the Rocket Girls, about the women computers who worked at the Jet Propulsion Lab in the 40s and 50s. The other book was called Wide Open Town, A Queer History of San Francisco. So those two books have nothing to do with each other. But in my head, in some kind of weird alchemical reaction, they combine to inspire the character of 17-year-old Lily, who lives in San Francisco's Chinatown in the 1950s, who's obsessed with rocket science and also thinks she might be a lesbian. So that was the short story, and then my agent actually was talking with me about it, and he said, this could be a novel. And I hadn't thought of it that way, you know, but he was totally right. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I had a lot more to say about Lily, and that's when it became a novel. So all my books come from very different places. That's the specific journey that Telegraph Club took. I'm excited to see how my fellow award-winning authors here, how their ideas came to them too.
Yeah. I guess I'm next. Can y'all hear me, or is okay, good. I never do know. My second book, A Snake Falls to Earth, came to me in a different way than my first book, Elatsue. Elatsue was something that I'd been thinking of since I was a teenager in various forms, because I was always fascinated by the concept of how different species of animals would be ghosts with different supernatural abilities. But A Snake Falls to Earth was something I wrote within 1 year. And it's because after I finished Elatsue, I realized I really enjoyed writing one character who only appears for like 1.5 chapters, maybe. And that's Coyote's daughter, who was a figure based on a lot of these traditional stories that I hear growing up from my mother, who's Lipan Apache, as am I. And so I wanted to write a story where a bunch of animal people who were carnivores went on an adventure, and I think that carnivores oftentimes have a bad reputation that they don't deserve, and I just wanted to write about these animals in a way that would highlight how beautiful they are. And it ended up evolving from that to just a wide array of different animal people. And it also turned into a book about the near future of Earth. And I think that what I wanted to do was write something that was very hopeful, especially considering a lot of the frightening things that are happening to our climate, specifically in Texas, which is the homeland of my people in terms of like drought and intensifying storms. And it was a very difficult year personally because I spent a lot of it like in and out of the ICU and other hospital rooms with my father, who passed away. And I wanted a book that was hopeful and that was just the story of my heart. And so it came from all of these different threads that I think have supported me growing up. My love of nature and the world, and my love of the stories I heard as a child, and also my hope that in the future things will be difficult, but we are going to persevere. That's the short answer.
I think for me, a lot like Melinda, the stories find me as opposed to the other way around. And oftentimes something will happen or I'll observe something, and that just the idea of that sticks with me. And so, for instance, the first book that was published was Lupe Wong Won't Dance, and that was just my daughter came home and was upset about having to square dance in PE and didn't understand why she had to square dance and how it had nothing to do with us or our background. And then, of course, as we write, we incorporate, like Darcy said, our own experiences into these books and maybe wounds that we have from our childhood from square dancing or such. And with the last Quintista, it was something I kind of wrote on a break. I needed a break so I do writing prompts. A lot of writers, it's just kind of a question or a proposal, and I typically will write a short story, and it was take a traditional fairy tale and make it sci-fi. And I decided, okay, for this short story, I'm going to give some airtime to a story that doesn't get a lot of airtime, which is Princess and the Pea. And I don't know if anybody knows, because a lot of people don't know this tale, but it's basically about a prince who's searching for a bride, and the queen decides she's going to test these prospective princesses who will arrive, and a true princess actually arrives, and they're like, well, we got to make sure she's the real deal, and so they put a pea under the stack of like 20 mattresses or something, and she has a horrible night's sleep, and so they go, oh, she's so delicate, she must be a princess, and that really annoyed me. So I decided I was going to write a different tale about a girl who didn't sleep at all, but when she woke, she was traveling across the universe, and it was really hokey. Instead of the P, it was a PEA, or Pellet of Extended Animation. I know, really cheesy. And the original title was Petra Pena and the PEA. And my editor said, you are not good with titles. We're going to change that. So anyhow, that's how the story began. And it was just a short story, and this girl awoke from this cryo state, and the world had changed, and society had changed, and it frightened her, and the things that she valued. And the concept of that just stuck with me. And so later I said, you know what, I want to write a novel about that. And one thing that really was important, like Darcy talks about what was happening with, in Texas and the environment there. For me, the thing that bugged me was if you woke up, what would you, first of all, what would you take with you? What do we value most as humans? And for each of us, that's something different. And for my character, it was storytelling and books, because I think maybe that's what I value most. And so those parts of ourself enter in, and then this book just took on a life of its own. So it just started out as a little writing prompt, and like I said, they just kind of find me. I don't find my story ideas.
It's fascinating thinking about how each one's brain works differently and the nuggets that we take. It's the story alchemy that we can't really explain, and it's really exciting. And so, Melinda, I'm going to put you in the hot seat first because, again, we have a relationship. So, first of all, I have to say that without you and the work that you did with Cindy Pon, my other beloved, wonderful writer, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be writing because you really paved the way for so many of us writing stories that featured who we are and our communities. And so I wanted to thank you for that and give you your flowers on stage.
That's so
Yes.
nice. Thank you.
And what you've done with the story of Lily and Kath in this book, you take us into a story of the past, right? We are in San Francisco, we are in the 1950s, we are grappling with and feeling like the Red Scare, but so much of what you did in this book also reflects what teens and what we are dealing with now, I believe. And I want you to discuss a little bit on your journey to historical fiction, like why set the story then, and then also sort of your research process. How did you make this story set in the past feel like we're living it right now?
Well, it's set in the past, but it was written from 2016 to 2020.
All right.
So, you know, life that you're living comes through into the pages. So I honestly was not consciously trying to draw any real parallels, but when I came up with this story, the idea for this as a book, I realized it did speak to a lot of what was happening right then. Like I started working on it in early 2017. It was a dark time in our country. And it just, you know, those parallels, they kind of come through, I think, instinctually. I really tried to not consciously put them in there at first because I feel like that leads to a feeling of artificiality. So what I would do was research a lot. I didn't know anything about the 50s, so I had to start off doing a lot of research about the 50s. And that really inspired a lot of the things that happen in the book. And then I wrote it. I mean, it took a while, but my editor would then pull out various themes, and he would say, this is what you're doing here, and you're doing this here, and I would be like, oh, I didn't know that.
You didn't know? You're telling me you didn't know
No.
that? Oh my God.
So the thing is, he tells me these things, and then I see it, okay? And then I can consciously go through and strengthen those threads and tie them together. And so for me, I'm sure that my editor was very attuned to what was happening now and what was happening then, and he really helped me to pull that together, I think.
And help you sort of stitch this tapestry.
Yes, absolutely.
Editors for the win, like literally, we
Yeah.
need them always.
Oh, yeah.
And since you were talking about the fact that you were influenced by what we were dealing with now and it's seeped into the page, I have a general question for everyone. I feel like right now, stories are under siege. And each one of you tackles sort of all different kinds of stories in your work, right? And I feel like these things have real world consequences. Authors, librarians, teachers are literally facing censorship and threats and lawsuits. I mean, thinking about what happened to Salman Rushdie, I'm like hoping he makes a full recovery. And I feel like it's making it dangerous for us to tell certain kinds of stories and to center certain kinds of kids in those stories and to present emotional sort of tissue and fat in our narratives that speak, you know, truth to power, essentially. And I want to know sort of how you're feeling about your stories in the marketplace now and in this sort of, it feels like a combat of ideas happening where people who look like us and write the types of stories we write are constantly under siege. And I want to know how you feel about it, how you approach it, especially in your work, because each one of these stories is revolutionary in and of itself. Who wants to tackle that first?
Oh, I guess we're going down the line. When you asked this question, I thought back of an instance I've written about before in a very early essay, like it was 2016, I can't remember. When I was in junior high, I read an old history book, and it said the Lipan Apache were extinct. And I was like, oh, what? Am I like a dinosaur? What's happening? And like for the longest time, though, that's kind of what this prevailing, at least what colonialism wanted people to believe. They wanted people to believe that there had been, that the death of my people and other Native peoples, the murder of it, like that had been successful, and that was simply wrong. And it kind of went hand in hand with its tendency to erase Native voices, all sorts of Native voices, not just the Lippot Apache, but indigenous voices in general. And so finally I'm starting to see pushback against that. I'm starting to see stories being published because they've always been here. We've always told stories. It's just like there hasn't been this wider ability to reach readers. And if you go in television, in movies, different types of media. So I think that's something, it's very important. Not just for non-Native readers who might not know we're around, but also for Native readers who, like me as a child, might feel very discouraged reading stuff that consistently claims we're no longer here, something that we've been fighting against, since before my great-great-grandmother Lorenza. So when I hear about these attacks against stories, it can be frightening, and I'm frightened for young readers who might need these books desperately, and who are now finding it more difficult to access them. But as a writer, I'm just going to write my stories. It's what else can I do? And I'm going to try not to let that in any way affect the stories that I need to tell, and just keep at it.
Well, I think, it's kind of ironic because when I was writing The Last Quintista, it was prior to all the chaos that's going now with book banning and such. So people say, they think we have this crystal ball and we know what's going to be happening. And my book is specifically about the erasure of stories and how this culture wants to erase the things that they fear and the things that they don't understand. And so when my book came out and all this started happening, people were like, how did you know? I'm like, I didn't. But it was the thing that I feared the most, which ironically is why I think people seek to ban things and erase things. It's based out of fear entirely. And if you look at why they're doing that, it's just because they don't understand. And because they don't understand, they don't seek to try and understand because they are afraid. And so it's easier to ban or erase something. And so, like Darcy, I've decided that I can't operate in fear because fear is what got us here in the first place. And so I'm just going to keep writing, and I'm so fortunate that I'm with a publisher that said, we're not going to italicize your Spanish. We're going to write the book the way you wrote it, and let's let readers understand and comprehend it, and then by the end, you've created a connection and something that didn't exist before. And my hope is the next generation will get it right, and they will, not be based in fear, and we'll all understand each other and hopefully eradicate all these issues that are happening.
Thoughts?
My thoughts are that I think that it's easy to get distracted by the debate online about why certain books are banned or what's in the books, and because the truth is that this tide of censorship and parental rights laws in schools across the country and states across the country, they're not based on the books. These people haven't read our books. My book is on many challenged and banned books lists, but they haven't really read my book. They don't care what my book is actually like. This is a far right and new right effort to make a new culture that does not include Black, Indigenous, people of color, or LGBT people, especially transgender people. I feel the most for trans kids. honestly. So I think that it's important for those of us who care about the rights of everyone to stand up in our local communities, get involved in your local school board, pay attention to what's happening, vote in your local election, organize with people of like-minded people in your community to support all of us. Because it's just not about the books, really. It's about making room for everyone in this community. And we have to use the tools of our local democracy to do that.
And I'm so good, yes. And I'm so glad it hasn't scared you, right? Because I think that is the mission and the goal, is to scare us off and scare us away from writing about the next generation of readers and what they deserve to see. Because I think that had I seen or read any of your books as a young reader, I would have been a writer sooner. I would have known that it was possible to write the stories about people who look like my grandmother, and exist in that community much faster. And I feel like we rob so many young people's imaginations when we don't provide them books like yours, so they know that they have access to story. And so, Donna, I'm going to put you in the hot seat next. What I love so much about your book is that you use the tools of genre, of science fiction, right, in order to talk about something that I think is so important, the thing that we're engaging with now. And I want you to talk a little bit about why you set your story in this way, and why you're using the tools of genre in order to get at this very real world problem that humanity is facing. So many people, and I love sci-fi fantasy, and I get sort of knocked on for that, because it's a lot of snobbery that happens in our industry.
We're all sci-fi lovers.
Exactly, right? We love it, okay? And the fact that you've been awarded and you won, it felt like a triumph for all of us nerds who love sci-fi fantasy. I want you to talk a little bit about that genre. Yes.
Well, I too am a huge sci-fi nerd, proudly. I, grew up watching I was a Trekkie as a kid, and we didn't have streaming. You had to wait, and I love the Twilight Zone, and there's just so many things that had huge influences on my life and writers. I didn't know I was combining. I knew I was combining genres, and I knew my idea was weird, and I didn't think anybody was going to accept it. And even when I approached my editor, and he goes, "Well, what are you working on?" And I'm like, "Oh, you're not gonna like it," because I had written Lupe Wong Won't Dance, which is contemporary and humor. And so I kind of told him the idea, and he's like, "Why don't you let me decide and send it to me?" And so. It is a very different book, but I used my love of sci-fi, and for some people, it's not sci-fi enough. Mm-hmm. And but I also felt like, as a kid reader, I would have really liked to read a book like this, and so I just went with it. And I didn't realize this, but the last kind of sci-fi genre of with space involved was The Giver, or not The Giver, but A Wrinkle in Time,
yes.
Which was 60 years ago. And so it seems like this huge span, and we had The Giver in between, but it wasn't really a space sci-fi. But so this was completely off my radar, that this was even a potential to happen. But this book was something that I needed to tell, and I love that, I got my sci-fi nerddom involved, and my friends, and as writers and then now that I've written it, I'm like, I'm writing more sci-fi, which I didn't know I was going to before, but now it's kind of stuck with me. But the book, because it involves folklore and mythology, and tales from tales from my family and Mexican folklore, I didn't know how it would be received, and but it was so much a part of me, these different things of myself that weave together, that I didn't know how people would receive it. So I love that more people are reading it, because now I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna reel you into the sci-fi world, and so I didn't know I was doing it though. When you said that I was mixing these genres, I didn't realize that I was. I was just writing what I am and what I know.
I love that because I feel like your book is going to be some young reader's first introduction to genre. And what a beautiful thing that is, right? In curriculum, right? We get to read A Wrinkle in Time and The Giver, but to see sort of Latinx and Latina culture extrapolated into space, right?
Yeah.
Because I always make the joke, oh, we don't make it. Right, you know what I mean? BIPOC people, we don't make it into space or into the future, right? Like
Yeah.
what happens to culture? I argue with my bestie, Zoraida Cordova, who's a wonderful writer too, who's Ecuadorian. She's like, I don't know about Latinos in space. I don't know if we're gonna make it. Like what happens? And like, you did it. You did it. You did it. And I just was like, it felt very triumphant and very exciting.
Well, in my background, I was a biochemistry major, but also, so I didn't study writing formally in college, but I'm also an eye doctor, so I would got to bring all these other parts of myself into this book, and so, yeah.
It was very triumphant.
Yeah.
And so now a general question for you all, since we're talking about sort of all of our influences and what goes into our work. I feel like, the Library of Congress is here, we're in the National Book Festival. Libraries were such an important part of who I am and the fabric of what I have become. I think that libraries and librarians are the lighthouses of our communities, and they are under attack. And I feel like if I hadn't had my classroom library, my public librarian, I wouldn't be who I am. And I want to know about how libraries factored into you as a reader, you as a writer. I didn't want to be a writer either. I didn't study writing at all. I just wanted to be a doctor, and then I failed chemistry. And I had to figure it out.
It is awful.
Right, it's awful. Chemistry is really awful. I failed it, and then I became a teacher. I said, I'll be a book bully for the rest of my life. I'm good at that. And then I became a teacher and librarian, and because I wanted to be that lighthouse that I had when I was a young person. And I want to know, what is your relationship to libraries as you were a young person? And did it factor into how you approach your work? Who's going first?
I can begin. So I grew up in a very, very small town in the middle of the desert in Central California, and there was one town library. And my parents were both teachers. My mother taught kindergarten and first grade, and my father taught high school level history. And so as a kid, we didn't have a lot of extra money to buy books. So the weekends, I would beg my parents to take me to the library on the weekends. And if my parents did buy a book, my mom, and if there are teachers out here, you know this, always in the back of your mind, you're thinking, I'm buying this, but it's gonna end up in my classroom. So any toys I ever bought or books, I knew my mom was gonna try to steer me into the grade level that she was teaching. And so I got to a certain point where I didn't want the books that she had for that level. So Mrs. Hughes, who was our town librarian, who was just amazing, I would walk in and she knew my love of sci-fi and fantasy. And so I got really overwhelmed. And some of us, you can walk into a place and if there's too many choices, it's really overwhelming. And I was always that way in libraries, and my mom would end up yelling at me and going, we gotta hurry, we gotta go. And so I would walk in and Mrs. Hughes would have a stack behind the desk. And then she would say, okay, choose this many, because there was a limit on how many we could take home. So she was just this godsend to me as a child, because sometimes she would put in books that maybe I wouldn't have chosen, but I think she thought that I needed to read because of this town that I was growing up with. And I was one of very few minorities. And so she was kind of magical. And I think that she would pull and push books into, and she's like, I think you need this one. And so I was able to take those books home and read them and leave this dusty little town and for a few hours and go to different places. So it was for sure a lifesaver for me.
I'll go. So I was born in China. We came to America when I was about 3.5 and moved to Boulder, Colorado. And one of my earliest memories of moving to America is going to the library with the daycare I went to. They took us to the Boulder Public Library, and I have such fond memories of the children's room there. They had this tunnel you could crawl through, which I thought was amazing.
That is amazing.
And and they had these giant rolling couches. So you crawl, the tunnel went underneath the couches, I think. And I loved it so much. I mean, not only for the tunnel on the couch, but because of the books, which I could take out, and they were free. And you could like take as many as you wanted, really. And I'm sure there was a limit, but I don't remember if I hit the limit. And I remember loving this place so much. And I moved away from Boulder when I went to college, but after my first book was published, I went back there just to go to the children's room. And at that point, I think that the couch was gone. I know, it was terrible.
But it probably was full of germs.
It probably was really full of germs, yeah.
Thinking coronavirus and like,
yeah, it probably was very filthy. But I was just saddened that the couch was gone. But I did visit my books in the library. I just kind of stood there and looked at them, and it was just so fulfilling. Like I know that when you see your book on a library shelf, it means that it is not checked out, but still.
But it's there.
It's there
to be circulated,
right?
Which is nice. It hasn't been weeded.
Someone could check it out.
Exactly.
Oh yeah, and I guess like with me it was different in that, from what Donna said, in that we moved a lot when I was a child, but could consistently find a library near about any town or city we went to. And I think like some of my most formative libraries in Coralville, Iowa, and Iowa City, Iowa, Castleton, Vermont, and all these places, Texarkana, Texas. They became almost like my just like escape place, like where I'd go and I'd read everything on the sci-fi fantasy sections, but I'd also like go to the kids sections. And I vividly recall the first time I picked up like a Dragonlance book when I was young. I was like, what is this? And that so began my great love of nerdy fantasy. But yeah, and I think it goes far back even to when my mother was a child, because her father used to work at this Goodyear in McAllen, Texas, and it was not too far away from the library. So sometimes he'd take like the older kids with him to work, and they needed either they'd play there, like using like his wrenches as like dolls. Like my mom would show me how she'd see the little mouth in the wrench, or they would need a safe place to be, and the librarians at the library actually kind of looked out for them. And that's where my mother learned that she loved science fiction fantasy and passed that on to me. And so they've always just been like these really like beautiful places, these oases in strange towns, where I didn't know anyone, but I knew that books would be there for me, and librarians would help me find them.
Which is incredible.
Yeah.
Thinking about how important they are, and to watch them be under siege and have to deal with things when it's like we just want to put books out there, feels like just overwhelming and insurmountable. So, Darcy, I'm going to put you in the hot seat even though you just spoke.
No.
Yes, it's your time. It's your time. Okay, so telling the tale, like telling a book, is as important as, and as exciting, can be as exciting as what the tale itself is about. And I feel like the way that your work, the way that you tell stories is incredible and fascinating, and almost feels revolutionary in a publishing industry that wants us to tell the same type of story in the same type of way. And I feel like you're running directly in the opposite direction. And I want you to talk a little bit about sort of Native and Indigenous storytelling. I want you to talk about sort of how you approach your stories and what you faced. I can only imagine how many times people have given you rejections or evil Goodreads, all of those things, right? We should not be on Goodreads, but sometimes we break and we look. Just to tell the story and to tell the tale in the way that it's supposed to be told, because there's something so special about your work, and I would love for you to talk about it.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm proud to say that I've never been on the Goodreads page for any of
Yes,
my books.
block it. Yes, that is the.
I have a lot of self-control. But I guess The Snake Falls to Earth was really the book where I did have some concerns about the way that this story wanted to come into the world. That's because for those of you who read it, A Snake Falls to Earth is told through two perspectives, one of them first person, one of them in the third person. One of these perspectives is a human living in the near future Earth. One of these is this cottonmouth snake, like spirit, teenager, living in this world of like spirits and monsters And this world is actually a place that is heavily inspired by the traditional stories I heard growing up, especially the stories that were told clearly with a large element of entertainment within them. And they would oftentimes feature the same character, sometimes humans, sometimes they were animal people, actually often they were animal people. And these people would go on adventures, and they didn't always have like this tidy little resolution, but they were always very entertaining. And what I loved is that the more of these stories that I heard, the more I felt I came to know these animal people or human heroes and their friends and just the world they inhabited. So Snake Falls to Earth, all these chapters, the Snake Kids chapters, a lot of them are written in this kind of self-contained story style in the first half of the book. Then the two characters meet at Earth, and then there's like 3 different endings. So it's just like, it very much deviates from the common like 3-act structure book that you'll find on the shelves. And I gotta say, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I think that there are many very wonderful, legitimate ways for stories to be told. And what I was worried about, though, is that people would be so familiar with the 3-act structure, with stories not necessarily told in a way that is strongly inspired by the traditional Nippon stories I heard growing up, that it would have difficulty finding readers. Fortunately, I think that in many ways, those fears have been proven wrong, and I do actually credit like librarians and teachers and people who realize that young readers are hungry for all manner of stories told by all types of storytellers, and who have made this book available. And of course, being the first Native writer to be recognized by the Newbery Committee was astonishing. I actually didn't quite believe it. Like, and part of it was that I knew I could remember there had been books about us before, but what I didn't realize is they weren't written by Native writers. Mm-hmm. And I think the more Native writers I meet and kind of read, because I'm in a writers group with a whole bunch of great people that I can't wait to share their works with the world when they're published, but is that I do find that a lot of them are writing in what would be considered more quote-unquote experimental styles, but really it's just us drawing upon the way that we were raised, these stories that we were raised hearing. And what I hope is that this is just the beginning of many new opportunities for people to maybe write things that aren't common on bookshelves, but that are important nevertheless.
Which is so important. I mean, we have to also make available to our young readers all different ways to experience story, right? So that it doesn't feel, you don't feel that fear as a storyteller, that your story is welcomed and that the children are ready. And they've been made ready because we as gatekeepers, as librarians, teachers, educators, parents have done the work to make sure that the bookshelves that they pull stories from have lots of different kinds, and that we can have a new model for storytelling. Speaking of which, I'm gonna have 2 more questions and then we will be opening up for Q&A. If you don't feel confident coming up to the mic, you can, there'll be volunteers to help you write down your question, and we'll also read it as well. But get those ready because we have about 5 more minutes before it's Q&A time. So, a general question for everyone, thinking about sort of how we tell our stories and what we put in our stories. I feel this sort of a little bit of a pressure, right? You all are award winners. You're very fancy now, right? And with that comes a certain kind of responsibility and a weight of responsibility. Darcy, when you said that you were the first Indigenous, like, first of all, I'm embarrassed for the committee, like for the, you know what I mean, so many years of it, right? And the fact that you're the first, that means the first of hopefully many to come, but with that comes a responsibility, right? And I wonder when you are, if you're feeling this way, if when you sit down to write, do you think about the responsibility we have to our readers? Because I think that we write for children, so there has to be both truth and hope mixed in together, and each one of your books has that. I want you to talk a little bit about what it feels like to win and have the spotlight on you. Melinda, it's a long time coming. Your body of work.
It was. I mean, so my first book came out in 2009, so I've been doing this for a while.
Yeah.
So it felt very satifying.
Yes, like
to win stuff.
Yes.
You know, it was
Your
great.
friends were screaming like, yes!
Took long enough. Yeah. It's been really, really nice. Are you trying to stress us out?
I know.
It's-
I know. I'm just, conversation. I haven't seen writers have been in my house, COVID, so I'm like dying to have tough topics, like conversations with
I
you all.
feel like for me, I don't know about you two, but I feel like for me, I have to be responsible to myself and my creative process and the stories that I want to tell. And I actually feel like winning some awards has been very freeing. I feel like, now someone's going to let me tell what I want to tell. Like in the past, you kind of had to fit things around publishing trends or kind of try to pitch them a certain way. And I mean, I've been very, I'm a very stubborn person. So in the past, even though I knew I was supposed to do this, I didn't really do it, but now I can just let go of that entirely. And it's been very freeing. I'm so excited to keep telling stories that I want to tell. The only problem is when you win some awards, then you're so busy that you can't actually stem doing writing. So I'm also excited for this to slow down a bit so that I can get to work again.
Get back to work.
Yeah.
Back to the page. Other fancy folk?
Well, as Melinda said, it's been really, really busy, and finding time to write is difficult. But the same thing, like I have to remind myself, because there's always this voice now in the back of my mind, people are going to read this. And I've had to be reminded by my editor, get that voice tuned out and just write what you want to write. Because I guess there are times when I say, I got to dial this back. This is too harsh, or this is too mean to this character, or too violent, or too this, or too that. And he said, just write it. If it's too much, we can fix it later. But I have to try to forget that all of this happened and just write what is, within the story, and get my brain out of it and just let my heart tell the story. But yeah, like Melinda said, sitting down in a chair and actually writing has become difficult because there are, school visits and things, people who want to visit with you, and so that part's hard, but there is a pressure involved in that, and I just have to kind of try to tune it out when it's just me and the page or the computer.
Awesome.
Yeah, I still don't it's strange to say, but I still don't feel like I've really made it. I don't know how to even explain that, because, before 2020, I was a scientist, and like my first book came out in 2020, and I guess just also the fact that these last 2 years have been spent like very much in isolation, like doing virtual visits. It just doesn't feel real yet. And I'm not sure how long it'll take for it to feel real, but I think that keeping a distinct difference between my work and my personal life really does help a lot, because then I can always just go and like hang out with the people I love and my friends, and the stresses from work tend to disappear. But yeah, I've got to say it's been so wonderful just meeting people who've read my stuff, and like every time it doesn't get old. Like obviously hearing so it's like, I like your book, and I'm like, oh, thank you.
Because it feels like your own little jewel that
Yeah.
you've polished and cleaned and all of that by yourself for so long, and then now other people have seen it.
Yeah.
And they're loving it, and they think it's awesome. I do have a teen question for you, Darcy, before you finish, from Sabrina. It says, Darcy, what made you switch from your scientific work, since you just brought it up, in oceanography, which is super fancy, which means you didn't fail chemistry like I did. You made it, to becoming a writer?
Yes, I should clarify that I got my PhD in oceanography studying plankton, specifically the genetics of these red tide forming, neurotoxin producing plankton from the Gulf of Mexico. So like I do have like a lot of experience with earth sciences and geosciences, that end up making their way into my fiction work. But unfortunately, in 2020, it was just, I couldn't do two jobs at the same time. It was just too much, and I kind of recognized that for my own like health, I had to choose, and writing has always been that one thing that has brought me so much joy, my dream, that I said goodbye to science as a career, but I still keep like active in the field by being advisor to my tribe. Like I don't get a paycheck for that, but that's not really why I do it at all. But yeah, it was mainly just a time thing. I think if I was able to survive without sleep, I'd still maybe do them both, but that unfortunately is not reality.
So now it's time for our questions from the audience. A reminder, questions have question marks. Please come up to the mic if I haven't scared you. And ask your question of these wonderful writers. Award-winning writers. I've never won anything, so I'm very in awe.
You will.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
This is a question for everyone. Do you have any advice for writers who want to write about diversity or highlight particular cultures or communities when they do not reflect it?
Could you repeat the last part?
Sure. When they do not reflect that particular culture or community.
So writing cross-culturally
Oh,
is the question.
Yes.
I always tell writers that it's important to do your research from a place of respect. So, you know, as a writer, I write about many kinds of characters who are not all exactly like me, and I do my research for every single character. So it's really just important to approach it from a place of humility and understand that you don't know everything, and, you know, do your research. Read memoirs. I enjoy reading memoirs to find out about how people lived, and talk to people, you know. But do your research before you talk to people so that you can ask them the complicated questions that you can't find out from other kinds of research.
And I think the biggest thing for people to consider when writing outside of themselves is why, right? Where as writers, we can write whatever we want, but should we write those things? And so I always make sure you interrogate that very deeply as you enter those waters, because it'll keep you both humble and afraid, which will keep you careful and respectful. And so those are the ingredients, I think, of writing outside of oneself.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Oh, no. Hello, my question is for Donna Barba Higuera. I teach 4th and 5th grade advanced academics, and I loved your book because of its message of the power and importance of our individual stories and the cultural heritage embedded in our stories, and how preserving those retains our humanity rather than eliminating it. But for my kids, I want to ask, have you thought about continuing to explore that theme with a sequel to The Last Quintista?
Everybody has this question, and I notice I did not put you in the hot seat for this.
These are tricky questions because as a lot of writers know, there are things we can and can't say. But yes, I'm exploring that, and it may not be what people think it's going to be, because a lot of times when we write a character, their journey hopefully has come from beginning to fruition, and then we say, okay, what more can we do? And a lot of times there's pressure, write a sequel, we want to know this, that. Sometimes we have to move on to something a little bit new. So sort of is the answer to your question.
Very excited.
Hello.
Hello.
I was wondering kind of what inspired you when you were younger, when you were starting to maybe write stories, and kind of what inspired you to take that jump to like trying to get something published or something like that?
It's a great question. I'm curious for everyone.
Yeah, and I something I tell people is you can be a writer even if you aren't published. So really for me, wanting to become a published writer was wanting to have readers and to reach readers and just make that connection between other people and my stories. And I gotta say that can be like a scary jump, especially for someone who like is super shy like me, like growing up. I've gotten over my a lot of the anxieties that I had when I was a child, but you know, it was difficult for me even to make connections with my peers. But always, ever since I was like 3 years old, I've just wanted people to read my stories. And not every story is for every person, and that's something that you also have to learn as a writer, that not everyone's going to love your work, but for the people who do, that's just so special, just to make that connection. And so that's really what encouraged me. What about Jill?
I wanted to be like my grandmother because she was a published writer. She wrote a memoir about my family in 1980. And so I wanted to be like her. Like I'm terrified of people reading my work. I do not go on Goodreads. I'm happy that they read them, but I'm so scared of that. Like I'm very scared of rejection and all of that. So I had to work really hard to kind of separate my desire to be a writer from what other people think of it. Does that make sense? And I also ended up getting a job as an editorial assistant at Random House. That was one of my first jobs, and I saw that basically everybody thinks they can be a writer, because I read the submissions that came in, and that actually gave me a lot more courage, because all these people were doing it, and you know what? I was as good as some of them.
You were better.
So, that gave me courage, but it's really, I really had to just work with that and try to separate my desire to do that from my fear of rejection. That was very hard, but you can do it, because I did.
And I think that's important to remember. There's lots and lots and lots of rejection. We have all had it. And it stings a little bit every time, but it just takes one yes.
Yeah.
And then somebody opens the door for you, and then your book is out there. And sometimes it happens very different ways for different people. Sometimes people write query letters and go, do cold calls. And, in my case, I was at a round table doing a first pages critique, and they read the first page of Lupe Wong, my editor, Nick Thomas, and like 3 days later, the book was going to acquisitions. It was a weird path, and we all have different paths, but in between that one yes, there's tons of rejection, and just like put on your coat of writer armor and go.
Be stubborn and be angry. That's how
I use it.
Stubborn and angry. Thank you so much.
Hello.
Hello.
This is a question for everybody. What do you do when you really want to finish a story, but you lack the motivation or don't know what to do?
So this is an attack upon all of us and our works in progress, right? We're facing it. I give myself a treat. If I can get to the end, that I can get the thing that I'm not allowing myself to have, whether it's like a skillet cookie or like a massage or like something that I want that I'm denying myself.
That's so smart.
And I put it at the end. Okay. I have to have incentive, like a little dog. I'm like, okay, I can just get, if I write the end, I'll get that cookie. That's how I do it.
What I do is I have a goal. Like if you're writing something and you want to get to the end of it, I make myself write 1,000 words a day. Okay? You don't have to do 1,000. You can do like 50 or whatever until you're done. And I do that because the 1,000 words don't have to be good.
They just have to be there.
They can be terrible. They often are. But I just have to get to them, and then when I hit 1,000, I stop. And I don't do more. Some days it takes me like an hour. Some days it takes me like 8 hours. Okay? So you gotta pick the number that works for you, but that helps me because then I get to the end. And once I get to the end, I can go back and fix it because usually it's really bad.
I guess I'm currently trying to write a book that the deadline, although hearing that it took because this is a historical book, so I thought I could get it done in a year.
No.
Seems to be I need a little more time than that.
No.
So I've been doing a lot of these methods. Reading stuff that I enjoy, like sometimes just like pausing the writing and reading something that genuinely brings you joy, it like subconsciously inspires you to then, I don't know, I always find myself to be more productive after that. The gifts do work.
Yes, yes.
But let me think, so sometimes I'm in a place in Texas where there's no Wi-Fi, no cellular connectivity. And I oddly find that when I can't connect to the internet, I need to write a lot more words.
Some good tips here.
So
Turn off the internet.
Maybe find a way to not just turn off the internet, but I have to force myself not to have internet by going somewhere where it's literally not available. But that tends to help. But yeah, it can be rough. All of us here do have different.
I'm in a critique group, and we meet every week for 3 hours
Oh my God.
on Thursday evenings. And what we do. And yeah, and I met those 3 hours before I got on a flight early Friday morning to get here. I'm on the West Coast, but having that we each bring a chapter each week, we read them out loud and critique each other's work. And I think that because I have that in the back of my mind that I need to, it feels like a responsibility to bring every week, that kind of keeps me on track and keeps me going. So if you're a writer, even if it's a critique group of one other person, it's so important to have someone read your work. And yes, it is scary, like Melinda says, like it's scary to have others read your work, but you form this little treehouse of trust amongst yourselves, and then just find a few people who you work well with. And it's okay to go, this isn't working, and move on. But yeah, if you can find someone else to write with, that's great.
Accountability.
Accountability,
Thank you so
right.
much.
Thank you.
All right, so this is a question for Darcy. In your first book, Alatswe, you sort of take sort of like a hybrid approach, like, the world is sort of like ours, but with fantasy elements. Were there any ways you found yourself surprised in terms of the way you were able to explore issues in ways you wouldn't be able to if it had been like strictly like realistic fiction or strictly like fantasy?
Yeah, and that's something that, the book I'm working on that I mentioned is kind of like Alatswe in that it is a version of Earth, except there's all these supernatural stuff. And it is really cool how fantasy is able to kind of interrogate a lot of real world issues in a way that sometimes has just enough distance to make it more like digestible. Me as a writer, I find that to be true. Sometimes even there's something that would be like really painful for me personally to put it on the page without having this added element of, no, this is in a different universe. So it reflects reality, and yet it also is something a little bit fantastic. But also it was really cool just having Ellie's mom in the first book like tell a vampire, you're not welcome here, and then like he had to get out of her home, which was like all of Texas. So that was fun and surprising.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, so this is a question for Melinda. So in your book, I feel like there's a very vivid sense of place in terms of like the neighborhood and the time period. So I was just wondering, like, what was your research process for sort of like fleshing out like all the characters in your novel and all the places, and also what was your kind of approach in terms of portraying the like violence and suspicion that those communities were experiencing in sort of like a YA for the specific audience that you were writing for?
Thank you very much. So I lived in San Francisco for about 15 years, and so I love the place. I don't live there anymore, but I just loved it. So that really helped inform the sense of place. I also went back to visit, and I walked the path that Lily walks every day to go to school. I found locations on site. I took a lot of photos, and I really immersed myself in the research. And I wanted to portray the reality of the time. I didn't actually concern myself with making it appropriate for teens, I'll be honest. I just tried to be real. I wanted to be real about it. And as a queer Asian American woman myself, I encounter these microaggressions at times, and it's just realistic. So I just put them in there as I felt that Lily would have experienced them. And because I knew that even though there are these things that happen to her that are unpleasant to experience maybe, there are also many wonderful things that happen to her. And I think that happens to everyone, and life is made of good and bad, and I wanted to include it all. So.
Thank you. Can we take this last question? This final question? Okay.
Hi, this is also a question for Melinda Lowe. I loved Last Night at the Telegraph Club, and I had a very similar question about your research process, because the way you describe San Francisco at that moment in time is so immersive and it's so thorough, like you have all these small details that really make the story come to life. But I guess what I'll ask you now is, are there other places and specific like times in history that you're interested to explore further in more work in the future?
Oh, absolutely. I hope to write more historical fiction, and I hope to write about different places. And I will just leave it at that.
Secrets. Well, thank you so much
Thank you.
for joining us today. And thank you for coming and listening to these amazing writers.
And thank
You're
you,
awesome.
Danielle, for the amazing moderator.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Thanks so much. Everyone enjoy the National Book Festival. It's awesome.